Hi everyone, welcome to Behind the Biomedical Engineer, where we talk with BME specialists about their experiences in the field of BME and beyond. Today we are here with Dr. Jenna Mueller, an assistant professor in the Fischell Department of Bioengineering at the University of Maryland, College Park, and in the Department of OB-GYN and Reproductive Science at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. She received her bachelor's degree in bioengineering with a minor in global health technologies from Rice University, and received both an MS and PhD in biomedical engineering at Duke University for her work developing optical systems and algorithms to improve the accuracy of cancer excision during surgery. Before joining the University of Maryland, Dr. Mueller was a Postdoctoral Associate at Duke University, where she worked with a multidisciplinary team to develop the pocket colposcope, a low-cost device to screen women for cervical dysplasia, which is now commercially available. Her lab combines optical imaging, image processing, ablative therapies, and human-centered design to develop biomedical devices to solve challenges in global cancer. It's great to have you here, Dr. Mueller. To learn a little bit more about the basis of your work with BME, how would you describe your current research to yourself as a second-year university student?
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I love that you're doing this podcast. So the way that I would explain my work is we are developing biomedical technologies to increase access to cancer diagnostics and therapeutics. So a lot of my work focuses on developing technologies for low and middle income countries, or LMICs. And I'll talk about those today at the seminar, but just to give you an example, we are developing a low-cost laparoscope to enable laparoscopic surgery in LMICs. So laparoscopes are used in all sorts of cancer excisions and other surgeries in the chest and abdomen. And it allows surgeons to just use a few small incisions in the abdomen as opposed to creating a really large incision. But in order to see what they're doing through those few small incisions, they need to insert this laparoscope. And that illuminates the abdominal cavity and also provides the video for people to see what they're doing during surgery. But that technology, it costs over $200,000 to outfit a single operating room. And so we are significantly decreasing cost and complexity in our laparoscope by essentially bringing consumer-grade electronics like we have in our smartphones back into medical equipment. And so that's a lot of the perspective that my lab brings. And we've actually made a laparoscope that we can build for just $1,000, and it achieves comparable image quality and performance to that really expensive standard of care system. So that's kind of a snapshot of what we do. We have other projects in other spaces, but really what drives my work is this idea of democratizing access to healthcare services so that patients can benefit from that no matter where they live.
Awesome, that's really cool. I think that's a super unique approach to developing medical devices and bringing accessibility. I feel like that's kind of been something that in my education has become more prevalent over the years. Yeah. So it's really cool to kind of see you doing it and succeeding so heavily. Like I was looking up the colposcope last night and was just amazed with that. So it's super cool.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's been a really great project to be a part of because that was a device that I got to work on as an early prototype, and now it's a medical product that you can buy, and we have FDA clearance, and we formed a startup company that I consult with still today. So it's been a really great opportunity to see a medical device go from prototype to actually implementation. And I'm trying to do that with other projects that are a little earlier on in the pipeline.
That's awesome. And was that your intention when you first started that project?
The goal was always to get it to women in LMICs.
Awesome.
And I think the framework that we use to really do that and why we were successful is because we took this human-centered design approach. And so the idea of human-centered design is that you really work with end users so that you come up with a solution that will actually work for them. So they are the experts, right? So you defer to them, you bring them into the design process, and you co-design with them throughout this human-centered design framework. And so I think that's actually why we were successful with the pocket colposcope, and so that's why now I try to bring in people as early as possible and get clinicians' perspectives to see what will actually work on the ground.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense, kind of taking the end user and, like you said, they know best. It's going to be for their use. So, an undergraduate degree in BME is well known for its breadth. So how have you managed the breadth and specificity of BME?
Yes, that is a great question. I think that you need to work on problems that are really interesting to you, but then also you have to have some sort of expertise to bring to the table. So you're bringing a lens through which to approach that problem. So for me, BME is so broad, and especially there's so many opportunities in thinking about developing biomedical technologies for global health applications, which is really what I'm passionate about. But the lens through which I decided to approach that is through optical imaging. So that's what I decided to focus in my PhD. And in a PhD, I always like to say this to my students, in undergrad you learn a little about a lot. You learn the breadth of BME. In grad school, you learn more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing, which is what my friend, who was a little bit jaded at the time, said to me in grad school. But the idea behind that saying is that essentially you become an expert in something that you then go really deep in. And so for me, that was optical imaging, biophotonics, and now we're trying to use that framework, that skill set, and apply it to solve challenges in global health. So I think that's kind of how you manage. You have to go deep into something to get a PhD, but then you can kind of pull back and say, okay, now that I know how to do research, I can apply this to other problems.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Where do you think the field of BME will be in 5 to 8 years, kind of based on how it's developed since you entered the field?
Yeah, I think that it's becoming more and more interdisciplinary, and that is what is so exciting about biomedical engineering, is it sits at the interface of engineering and medicine. And I think that as we kind of continue to interface with other departments, so for example, computer science, right, there's so much happening in AI, and there's a lot of tie-in between AI and medical imaging, for example, right? So there's really exciting opportunities, I think, to bring expertise to the point of care, where maybe that expert isn't physically at the point of care, but you can task shift. You can say, okay, I'm going to put this device into the hands of a nurse as opposed to an OB-GYN. But then through AI, I'm going to be able to provide a diagnosis that's at an expert level diagnosis, because we've trained this algorithm through what an OB-GYN would normally say, okay, this is the diagnosis. So I think that there's so many ways for biomedical engineering to grow, but the really exciting ones are at the interface of these fields. And so I really think AI is going to ultimately transform how we do diagnostic medicine.
Yeah, that's super exciting too, from a patient perspective and from a BME perspective.
Yeah.
And what's the most shocking BME headline or journal title that you have seen in your career?
I mean, it has to be the mRNA COVID vaccine. I mean, that is just the speed of that, the development of that, the implementation of it. It was unprecedented, and I think that it's transforming preventative care. The fact that it got through FDA that quickly, I think, is really quite amazing. Usually there's such a high regulatory burden for getting things into the market. And there's a reason for that, right? FDA is so focused on safety, right? They want to protect patients' health. And so it makes sense. But I think the fact that we were able to, in a time of crisis, have the scientific community contribute so substantially through cooperating with regulatory bodies and really just getting that to people in need, I think it was a triumph for the medical and scientific community. So yeah,
definitely.
Those headlines, anything related to the COVID-19 vaccine. So
yeah, definitely. I actually didn't really know much about FDA regulation until afterwards, and kind of comparing the standard time for everything to be passed through to the COVID vaccine. I was so surprised. I was like, wow, that really is amazing. I didn't realize it at the time.
Yes. So on average, drugs and vaccines are included in this, take anywhere from, especially the first time we get a vaccine through, it takes around 10 years and $2 billion to get a new drug, new vaccine through the whole regulatory framework. So that goes from preclinical testing all the way through to when you're FDA approved and you're doing kind of like the post-market surveillance. So that whole process, 10 years, $2 billion. We did it in, like with mRNA COVID vaccines. I mean, it was a year.
It's so impressive.
Yeah. So I don't know how much money it cost, but we did it much more quickly.
Yeah,
so.
it's a super exciting time to live through too. I mean, obviously there was a lot of burden that came with it, but
so much loss and trauma. Yeah, for sure. And at the same time, science really impacted society in a positive way.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Yeah.
And failure is often hard to confront as a student and as a professional. So can you share an occasion during which you encountered failure and how you learned from it?
Oh, yes. Failure is so embedded in research and science and staying in academia. We get rejections all the time. It's so normalizing rejection, I think, is a really great thing to do as part of this podcast, right? So, but I will say, so for example, we are working on this laparoscope, and we realized that most recently we were having some interference from this cautery device. So it would it would interrupt the image or the video. And so I thought that the device was almost ready to be manufactured, implemented in this clinical trial we're trying to do in Uganda, but it's not quite ready yet, right? So we learned about this error that happens about 1% of the time it's being used when you're using it simultaneously with cautery in the body. And so that was really a frustrating thing to encounter recently, but I think that again is the power of human-centered design. It's this really iterative process, and as you realize that you have challenges or something is not working perfectly, it's an opportunity to learn and to make that device better so that doesn't happen down the line when you're already making a device. And so I think that catching the problem now and figuring out that we can actually deal with that through some electrical isolation is really exciting, right? And so we can build that into the design. It takes a little bit longer, but failure ultimately, if you can think about it as an opportunity to learn and grow, I think that kind of growth mindset serves everyone well in their career and in life, frankly, too.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
and the long-term benefit for your specific situation with that device will be so much greater than if you had not caught that. So
exactly, we caught an issue, and now we can account for it in the design process before we go to manufacture.
If you could give BME students at any level one piece of advice, what would it be and why?
I think that, it's really shocking how few problems you'll actually get to work on in the course of your career, right? We think of, especially when you're young, you think of your life as, I have all this time in my career to work on these problems, but really, we only get to work on a few problems in the course of our career. And so I think that follow what you're passionate about and do what you're passionate about now. So for me, it's this application within global health, right? How do I increase access to care? And I try to let that drive me and to drive what projects I choose to spend my time working on. So, work on what you're passionate about from the beginning.
Okay, yeah.
If you can.
Yeah, and it seems like a very simple concept, but it's so easy to kind of get caught up in thinking, like, what should I be doing rather than just following your interests. So I think that is really important advice to hear.
Yeah. And I've heard this Sudanese saying recently that I just love. It says, "Do not create the pen that does not eradicate ignorance and shame." And so whatever we are working on, make sure that we are creating technologies that are going to help people, right? That we're not just designing for high income settings, right? We're eradicating shame, right? Associated with disease or surgery in other cultures as well. So I think that, thinking about how to democratize access to care is really important for me, and that's how I interpret that saying.
Yeah, definitely. I like that a lot. And then finally, to end off, what's the least intellectual thing that you do when you're not at work, and how do you kind of get away from it all?
Okay, so the very first thing that came to mind was I love watching really trashy TV shows. And so The Bachelor and Bachelorette, I'm a part of Bachelor Nation. Like I'm all about those TV shows. And with my friends, I actually started basically like you predict who is going to be eliminated each week. So it's a Bachelor bracket. And so we do a buy-in, and then the winner at the end, who has the most points, got the most number of people correct, wins, the prize. Yeah. So yeah, that's a pretty embarrassing thing. But I love to do that to unplug with my friends and, watch a trashy TV show together and share a bottle of wine. So
that's super fun. It's a great way to kind of get your mind off things and to pour yourself into a different world almost.
Yes, exactly. Completely different than biomedical engineering. You just check out and think about, people finding love in this really weird way. Yeah. And they embarrass themselves and they do crazy things and so I love those kinds of shows.
Yeah, me too, honestly. Thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Of course. Thanks for having me.